Welcome back. Please hit that like button if you eat food. All jokes aside, I'm out here getting my hands dirty. I was cleaning up our beds. I got all this green manure or green waste, organic matter, that I was cleaning up throughout all these beds, and there's still a little bit more. I wanted to pick all of this material up off of our soil to prevent any molding. We've got pretty high moisture content. That's why I'm always letting these beds breathe. Always trying to refresh the oxygen in our beds and keep them from becoming stagnant in there. I noticed a little bit of molding on leaves that were kind of sitting and decaying on the ground, so I wanted to prevent as much of that as possible. I was also out here grabbing some of my cilantro. I absolutely love cilantro, and it's very good for you. It's detoxifying for your brain and body. A lot of people don't like it. They tell me that it tastes like soap or smells like soap, and I really love this stuff, so I don't know where they're coming from with that, but to each their own. We're out in the large John Payne heated greenhouse, sitting probably about 58 degrees there, and we haven't had much solar activity today. The sun's kind of breaking the clouds up a bit, but it's very, very heavy clouds. That is why our water is purging, but you can see both of our fans, our heating fan and our geothermal fan, running very well in here. Just wanted to show what the temps were in here on a cold day. It is probably about 20 degrees, maybe 19, 20 degrees outside, sitting 58, almost 60 degrees in the greenhouse, no sun shining on that thermometer. So all of that is just heat we're throwing in from our compost pile in our John Payne heating. Now, I was talking about all of this green manure, green waste, and this is basically the subject matter of today. Not specifically the green waste itself, but the actual soil that we are working with. So let's talk about soil here. This is a very heavy, compacted piece of clay soil, heavy clay soil that we are working with. And this is very nutritious, and it's very, very growable if you're able to work it. It requires very heavy machining to break all this up. You see the tractors out in the corn and soybean fields, always running around, tilling up the soil and really using some heavy, very expensive machinery to break this up and make it growable. The basis of all terrestrial life on Earth is the soil, and all of that soil has came to its final resting place from either being blown by wind, forced by water, eroded from the elements of the rock, or actually pushed by glaciers into their final resting place. However the soil has reached its final destination, it all started as rock. It's all been basically pulverized by Mother Nature from rock that rose out of the sea. So all of that rock has been basically broken down so fine, and all of the minerals and nutrients have turned into the soil we know today. One thing that the original soil is lacking is humus, or organic matter in the soil. Now, there's many plants that can grow in the nutritious soil that is original soil without that humus in it. And as those plants grow and start to decay and die back, and over time all of that humus becomes part of the soil, and then it is very good nutritious soil that we know today. So if all soil comes from rock, and all rock is different from around the planet, there is many different soil types. So soil ranges from heavy clay packed soil to very light and sandy soil. Now, a light sandy soil has very large particles compared to a heavy clay soil. The light and heavy do not refer to the actual weight of the soil, but the size of the particulates in the soil. Now today I'm going to be talking about heavy clay soil like we have here. We've got a big old chunk of heavy clay soil and some even more clay packed soil. Now these become hard as rocks when they dry out. Now, heavy clay soil is very hard to work, and it's hard to grow in unless you're putting a lot of energy and effort in by actually breaking that soil up with machinery. Our clay soil, we don't ever want to work it when it's wet, because we can very much damage it, and when it comes up and starts to clump up like this, all of those fine particles actually clump together to become large masses of like clay soil that is very, very heavy and hard, and it basically becomes like pottery clay. And we can damage that soil quite a bit by working it in the wrong moisture content, in the wrong conditions. But with a sandy soil or a lighter medium soil, it is very easy to be worked, and you can work it when it's wet or dry and not have to worry about the actual damaging of the soil itself. Now, we usually measure topsoil in inches where it meets the actual subsoil itself, and that subsoil contains a ton of nutrients and minerals, but it lacks all of that humus. Our heavy clay soil here has very, very poor drainage because of all those fine particles. the water doesn't want to move through it very good. So it requires a lot of work composting and throwing all of that humus and green matter on top of it after it has broken down to add all of that to the soil and give it its good consistency. Our subsoil is all the same. It has very poor drainage also. We don't get a whole lot of water wicking away, and being able to wick that water away and have a good moisture content as opposed to being very damp and stagnant really benefits us when we have our vegetable crops and our annual crops, because too much moisture content really rots those roots and it packs the soil together, not allowing those roots to actually spread out and venture to find their own nutrients. Relating that to our greenhouse, we have the same soil inside our greenhouse, but we've built upon that by top dressing. We're not really drilling down, we're not digging down at all, and I've only dug out the greenhouse to put my geothermal in. And originally when I laid these beds down, I had removed a little bit of topsoil to level everything out. Then I just started throwing compost and all types of used potting soils and everything, just throwing as much humus and good soil on top of all this as I possibly can. Now, before I had thrown compost in certain beds, I only had so much compost, so I was slowly plotting compost and old recycled potting soil from our farmers market and stuff like that in certain parts of the greenhouse. So as I was going through our greenhouse and slowly plotting all of our compost down and building upon the nutrients and humus in the greenhouse, I had a lot of the greenhouse that did not have anything. It was just bare clay hard soil. And in the summertime, this soil was getting so hard and so packed in certain spots where I didn't have any top dressings on to hold moisture and add that humus. I was using our root crops. So we've had a bunch of turnips, and you can see those large tap roots. Those tap roots actually do the drilling and do the work for us. Same thing with our radishes. I found this little rotten radish over there in the back corner. Forgot about him. But those tap roots go down and they aid in breaking up that soil and allowing humus to get down in there as we were top dressing over top of beds that we were pulling all of these out of. So root crops are a very good source of free tilling. They basically break the soil up for you. Rhubarb is another good one. Rhubarb basically taps down and breaks the soil up also. I had a few plots of rhubarb in here that I was kind of moving around and transplanting to kind of break the soil up a little better, and when I came through and top dressed, it allowed that soil to absorb and mix, and then I got a lot more humus and good soil consistency. Now, the heavy clay soil of the Midwest and upper Midwest is very good for brassica growing. I noticed that brassicas grow very well without any type of work. We can just throw them right in the ground, they tap right in, and they grow very strongly. But a lot of other crops require tilling and require a lot of compost addition to the soil, because that soil doesn't have all of the nutrients that are required to grow all of your summertime and fast growing veggie crops and fruiting crops. Heavy clay soil is referred to as strong soil by farmers because of its tendency to flocculate. And flocculate means that it has a tendency to break up into larger particles when it's not at a high moisture level. When it's almost dried out, it tends to break up and become very good and workable soil, and it tends to break up into smaller pieces. Now, this is a very humus filled soil that we have here, but I was just trying to give the impression of what flocculate means. Now, the opposite of flocculating is puddling. So puddling is basically, if you think about a snowball getting packed together, or a nice clay ball like we have here, getting packed together very tight and becoming almost sticky in substance when it's too wet and being worked. And that's what I meant by damaging the land. It's going to be very hard to farm and work that soil if you damage it during a very wet period, because all of that will basically pack together, become sticky like pottery clay, and when it dries and bakes in the sun on the next sunny day, it'll turn hard as a rock and basically disallow all of those roots to expand into the soil. Won't allow those seeds to actually break through the surface because it is hard as pottery clay. Now, another reason for the puddling or the compaction of that clay is high acidity levels. And just the opposite is true. In an alkaline soil, it has more tendency to flocculate and kind of break apart and be very good, beneficial, nutritious soil, easily worked and easy to grow in. You don't want to till your heavy clay soils if it is wet or if your moisture content is high at the time. You want to wait till it dries out a bit, because you will lead to a lot more damage, and you will have to work twice as hard to be able to work that soil after it dries out, because it clumps and it becomes so hard and dry like rocks. So to avoid using any type of machinery or tools to break up our soil, I've been using humus, compost, a whole bunch of green manure, all of our waste products basically, and turning it to compost and re-throwing it onto our land. So we're trying to be as self-sustainable with this as possible, and slowly plot out all of our compost into our beds to allow us to be able to grow without having to work down. I can go anywhere in my greenhouse beds and basically just split the soil apart with my hands. It's not hard as a rock. Right next to my walkways here, we have very, very hard clay soil. It almost sounds like you're knocking on a board. It is very, very hard and packed. Finished compost tends to be more alkaline in nature when it is finished, and it prevents all of that puddling or the clotting of all of that soil where it compacts and becomes very hard. As we're top dressing that compost onto our beds, we are bringing a whole lot more microbiological life and all of the worms. So as we put it on top, the soil underneath starts to break up and the worms do a lot of work for us, and they till that soil up for us in a natural sense and basically mix all of that humus in, so we have 6 to 8 inches to a foot of good growing soil with humus in it that lasts us years. I really wanted to share my experience with growing into heavy clay soils and the best way to go about it, because adding that humus and adding all the green manure to your soil is going to really, really benefit you and provide a much better grow environment and much easier to work soil. I really wanted to share with everybody the experience of growing in heavy clay soil and having it in the greenhouse. It has its own environment. We don't have a whole lot of moisture, and it gets very hard and dried out in the summertime. So having all of this top dressing on top of our soil really benefited us, held a lot more moisture, and got all that humus into our soil, because when we first started growing in here, the only thing I was able to really drill into the ground was our radishes and root crops, turnips and stuff like that, because they are able to tap right down into that hard clay soil. And I've battled this soil the entire time I've had this greenhouse up the last 2 years. This is our second winter in the greenhouse. We built it last fall, so it's probably not even 2 full years of growing in this greenhouse. But now that I've got all of my beds covered with compost, we're having very good success, and we're able to grow a multitude of crops, not just those root crops. So I hope everybody's finding this information beneficial, because adding to the topsoil and top dressing that heavy clay soil is about the only way to do it if you're not going to just basically break it all apart with machinery and till it up. I've got a bunch of partially finished compost here. You can just see the loam and the humus in this. There's still some sticks and twigs, some bigger material that didn't break down, but all of the humus in this is actually what we're looking for. This is what you want to basically top dress on top of your soil and allow that to be broken down by the natural sources and the natural microbiology in the soil. So going from a hard packed soil to a loamy, rich soil content is what you're looking for. You don't want to continue working into this very hard compacting soil. You want to continue to add all of your material on top, all organic material, and you'll really find that this method actually works quite well, and you're bringing a lot of life into your soil and benefiting your actual plants and all of your crops. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this video and checking it out. Hopefully it wasn't too long, drawn out, and boring talking about soil, but it is very, very important when you're growing into a very heavy clay soil.